All right, so this Knife Thoughts video is going to be a review of this knife, and this is the XTOUC. I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce it, but the SX603. So this is a knife that I believe I saw this brand on Instagram and was interested in learning more, so I reached out to them just asking if they could tell me more about the brand. And they said that they are a brand of knives that are made in the same cooperative factory as Civivi's OEM. So I'm not super familiar with, the manufacturing, how it works in China and everything, but it seems like there are these big factories where several different brands or maybe companies all, kind of use the same factory space, and they might have, different styles, different qualities, but they're in kind of the same space, maybe the same building, maybe the same city, something like that. But they said that their knives are made in the same cooperative factory as Civivi's OEM. So of course that's interesting because I love Civivi knives. They're made very well, and they actually offered to send one of their knives for review. So this was the knife that was most interesting to me, and also I have seen some other people do reviews of this knife and other knives from this brand, and they've been pretty positive. So I was interested to see, another budget brand. I like budget knives. I think that this is pretty much a golden age of budget knives. You can get a knife under $100. It's probably going to be made in China, but usually, you can get a lot of really nice, really different knives from a lot of different companies at budget prices that are a really good value. So I'm always interested in checking out new or other brands, and especially budget knife brands. So I got this knife, and unfortunately it had an issue where sometimes this button lock will work all right, sometimes it's super stuck. So it was only a little bit stuck there, but here I'm not holding on to, there's no lock bar to hold on to. It's a button lock, but this is like really taking a lot of pressure, enough that it is, it hurts a little bit on your finger, and it's just difficult to break that detent. And then sometimes, and it's usually after that, it will also, like that, have a very, very light detent. And it's not something, that I've really seen on many other knives. So there it has the light detent again. I have had some Kaiser button locks, or at least one that have had lock stick, to where sometimes it'll be really, really difficult to break the detent because of lock stick. And that might be what's going on here. You can see now it's kind of staying in that very light detent situation. That might be what's going on here. I'm not really sure. I considered taking this knife apart and trying to fix it, but then basically decided against it, because I think even on these budget knives, you should get the knife in a way that functions and not have to disassemble it. I know some people really enjoy disassembling a knife. I don't, dislike it, but it's just not something that I want to do if I don't have to, and I don't think I should have to on a brand new knife. But I did let them know on Instagram that this was going on, and they said that it's actually something that 2 other customers had told them recently, and that they would send a replacement. And I said, okay, but I just want to let you know that I will have to mention that the first one I got had this issue. That's something that's important to me as someone who does reviews of knives, and I don't know how many people watch my reviews and then make a decision about what they're buying, but as someone who's putting these things out here into the world where anybody can watch them, I want to be honest, and I really strive to always be very fair and honest with what I say about knives. So I'm not gonna not tell you if I got a knife like this, or any knife, and it had what I would consider to be a pretty serious issue. And since then, they haven't, responded to me. I'm not gonna say that I have tried over and over again or anything, but it's just, I haven't heard back. So I decided to just go ahead and do the review on this knife. Now, let's pretend that this issue doesn't exist. First of all, sometimes it does open really nicely. If that issue didn't exist, I think that this would be a fine knife. It has 14C 28N steel, which is something you see on Civivi knives pretty frequently. It's pretty inexpensive at $53 on Amazon last time I checked. And that's actually a little bit less than most Civivis are now. Civivis, you know, kind of started out around that range. Now they're more in the $60 to $100 range, depending on the model, but it is a little less than a Civivi in similar materials and size, things like that, I would say. The G10 is kind of interesting. It has kind of a checkered pattern to it. It's not your typical G10. And it feels good. It feels like nice G10. It doesn't have the same kind of construction styling as Civivis, where it doesn't have the rounded liners, the blade isn't quite as rounded and things like that. The finish, it's more of a bead blast finish, not quite exactly like you see on Civivis normally, but it's a pretty similar quality level, I would say, again, if we pretend it doesn't have that issue. It is smooth. It has no blade play side to side. It locks up very solidly, there's no question about that. And that brings up what I think might be going on here. I think that this lock face might just be too rough. If you see in there, it's pretty rough. And it's definitely rougher than some other button lock faces that I have seen. So I'm wondering if it just doesn't have lock stick, and then sometimes it just has too weak a detent because it's getting that lock stick and probably getting some galling in there also. But it does lock up solidly. It just has a pretty rough lock face. As for the design, it's a very classic looking knife. It reminds me of some Benchmade model that I'm forgetting the name of. But I don't think that it's close enough to anything, because it is, you know, pretty like generically knife shaped to be like copying anything. It's just very classically pocket knife shaped, modern pocket knife shaped. It does feel pretty good in my hand too. Surprisingly, for it being not a super large knife, I get a full 4-finger grip. That upturn here at the butt doesn't really affect my pinky finger. I can hold with a hammer style grip, and it feels pretty good in the hand. It does have thumb studs. The thumb studs, again, because of that same issue, can also sometimes be a little bit difficult to use, but the detent being soft isn't as much of an issue when you're using the thumb stud. So even if it does have that softer detent, you can still open it with the thumb stud. It seems to cut pretty, so now it's super stuck. That's a good example. I'm kind of glad that happened. So you don't think I'm just complaining for no reason, but like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to break it with the thumb stud, and it might be improving some. I'm not sure. I have opened and closed it a good bit, and it doesn't seem to have improved a lot, but I'm not able to get it to open with the flipper either. So when it does have that happen where it's really, really, really stuck, you have to press the button, which is not difficult, and then it opens and you can go from there. But it seems to cut pretty well. I'm not sure that it's ground quite as thin as some Civivis, but I would say that it's pretty close. That's one of the things that Civivi knives really do a good job of, is being ground thinly. It looks pretty thinly ground here towards the ricasso, the plunge line. Up here towards the tip, not super, super thin, relatively thick, as you can see, but it does seem to cut pretty well. I didn't do a huge amount of cutting with this, to be honest, because sometimes it's uncomfortable to open, but it seems like it will cut pretty well. So it's one of those things where it's difficult because two people other than me maybe have had this issue, maybe more, and they just didn't report it, who knows. But it's not like every knife probably has this issue. And I think that for $53, if you got this knife and it had a nice detent, then it would be a really, really nice knife for that price. The problem is that Civivi knives and Sencut, which is the more budget brand of Civivi, as well as We, which is the higher end, they always, in my experience, have really nice detents. I mean, very, very, very crisp. It's one of the things that they just do really, really well is their button lock knives, and really any of their knives, have really, really well done detents. So for me, having this issue on this one, it makes me a little bit hesitant because I know I can buy a Civivi that's going to have, in my experience, every time a very, very nicely dialed in detent. And you know, this is the only one of these XTOUC knives that I've had, but this one does not have a nicely done detent. So it's unfortunate. You know, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like I said, I have seen other reviews where people, you know, praise this knife. So if you didn't have the issue with the detent, I think it would be a knife worthy of praise. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've had this knife or other knives from this brand, definitely let me know. Let me know if you've had any similar issues or not. And thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.